Hey, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this briefing by the Jerusalem Press Club. I'm Talia Dekel-Fleissig. As the IDF continues to fight in Rafah, international pressure on Israel grows. The UN Secretary General called to halt the IDF operation in the south of Gaza after a targeted strike against senior Hamas officials apparently caused a fire, killing several dozen Palestinians. Meanwhile, in northern Gaza, forces acting on precise intelligence have discovered more shafts leading to tunnels, including where the remains of 4 Israeli hostages were found. Of all those taken captive on October 7th, 131 have been released or rescued, and 125 remain in Gaza. At least 39 are dead, according to estimates by forensic experts in Israel. Yesterday, Israelis received yet another video of a live hostage, Sasha Tulfanov, whose father was murdered and 3 members of his family kidnapped and released in November. The world also witnessed the kidnapping of a group of women soldiers in a video publicized last week, of course, from the beginning of the war. Each video released increases pressure on the Israeli government to strive for a ceasefire deal, to release the hostages, and it continues to amount. To address these issues, JPC hosts Rami Igra, former head of the hostages and MIA's division of Israel's agency, the Mossad. After joining the agency, Igra served in several roles, including as the Mossad's Europe station chief. Following his retirement from the Mossad, he turned to healthcare, where he served in several senior roles. Hello, Rami. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning.
Rami, 2 days ago, you said in an interview on Israeli radio that Hamas will not release any hostages until it regains control of Gaza. Is this indeed so? Relinquish control of Gaza to a terrorist regime or bring our citizens home? Is it a zero-sum game?
Hamas from the beginning has been adamant on one demand. The only real demand that Hamas has put on the table is the return of sovereignty in Gaza to Hamas. In order to achieve that, Hamas is asking for cessation of hostilities, a permanent cessation of hostilities, and it really is asking Israel to forgive them for the 7th of October, let them regain control of Gaza, rearm, regroup, reorganize themselves in order to attack Israel in the future, according to Hamas's ideology. And Hamas, we have to remember, is a religious organization. And as a religious organization, it believes that at the end of the day, the only salvation, or the real salvation of the Palestinians, is the creation of an Islamic nation in the land of Palestine. So we are looking at a situation which is very difficult for the Israeli government to solve as long as Hamas is sovereign in the Gaza Strip. And if you're looking today at what's happening at the Gaza Strip, on the one end of the street, you have Israeli tanks and soldiers. And on the other end of the street, you have Hamas's sovereignty, actually now. They're the ones who nominate the police. They're the ones who give out the aid. They're the ones who run the sewer. They are the sovereigns in Gaza right now. And they ask, or they demand, to continue this sovereignty after the end of the Israeli attack in Gaza.
So then that begs the question, if the ideology is that they will run an Islamist state on Israel's doorstep, how can that be something that we can accept?
Yes, not an Israeli doorstep, in Israel. The doorstep, they want to cross the doorstep, as they have tried on the 7th of October. And because this is the situation, at the end of the day, Israel, and it doesn't really matter whether it would be Netanyahu or somebody else, cannot accept this demand. And the only way that Israel is going to somehow come out of this junction, I can't even describe what it is, this junction, is to instigate an alternative sovereignty in the Gaza Strip.
And do you have suggestions about who would be in charge of that sovereignty?
Listen, I personally like countries that start with S, like Sweden and Switzerland, but they're not coming. So we will go to countries that start with P. It's either Poland or Palestine. And at the end of the day, Israel will have to find some solution or create some solution that will include a Palestinian entity in the Gaza Strip, and at the end of the day, also in the West Bank. And it's evident Netanyahu's government, his current government, is not able to make this decision, and this is why we're at this junction with no real options of coming up.
So you also mentioned that in your interview as well, that there is really no choice but to establish a Palestinian state instead of what we have now. But what message is this? I mean, you deal a lot with psychological warfare and how this impacts the way of thinking of our enemies. How is this going to appear to Hezbollah, for instance, in the north? If October the 7th is what will be the steps towards perhaps filling in the vacuum with a Palestinian state. What does that mean?
Hear you. Sorry, I didn't hear you because somebody tried to call me. It's another television station.
Okay. So they'll have to wait.
Okay. They have to wait patiently. What I'm saying is that true, we Fatah and the Palestinians, as they are right now, are not our cup of tea. But this is what nature has bestowed upon us. We have Palestine like the Americans have typhoons, okay? At the end of the day, we have no other solution. It's the least of all evils, and it's not what we've been hoping for. But in order for us somehow to go over this impasse in Gaza, and at the end of the day, bring some of our hostages, if not all of them, and at the end of the day, change Israel's position in the world, change how we are looked upon in the Western world today, the only way that is plausible is somehow create an alternative Palestinian state, which will not only be Fatah, because Fatah are not Zionists, but will also be maybe the Gulf states involved, maybe Saudi Arabia, maybe the Americans, some kind of entity that will take over the Gaza Strip, and at the end of the day, also the West Bank, and will create a Palestinian sovereignty that will be able to continue its prosperous future with Israel. It's not easy, it's not simple. We all wish for a much simpler solution, but this is the solution that has been bestowed upon us. It's not that something that we have chosen. The Israeli government can't see that. The Israeli government is being held today by a pack, I would say, of very ultra-right ideological groups who see Israel in biblical terms and not in modern political terms. And this is why this impasse. But at the end of the day, Netanyahu days are going to be over. At the end of the day, we will have to find a solution. And if you ask me, looking forward 6 months, a year, somebody will have to come up with an alternative solution for the Gaza Strip, an alternative sovereignty. Somebody that will nominate the police and will not be Hamas, somebody that will deliver the aid and not the Hamas, somebody who will take care of the hospitals and not the Hamas, not like today. Today, the hospitals are run by Hamas, and only Hamas cronies get the right kind of treatment in the hospital. If you're a regular Gazan, you don't get anything. So we have to understand, and this is something that the Israelis tend not to understand, that even though we are militarily the governors of the Gaza Strip, the real people who govern the Gaza Strip today are Sinwar and Hamas.
So I'm going to go back to something else that you said in a different interview. Seeing as how you're in the media quite a bit, you told Anderson Cooper on CNN that Israel's treating the civilian population of Gaza as non-combatants, although they are behind Hamas. As you said, Hamas is providing the sewers, the hospitals, education, everything. So do you think that the Palestinian population will accept, or at least specifically in Gaza, accept the rule of all these alternative governors or other political entities that might take place? Will they accept it, and will they allow it to continue?
Listen, what I said on Anderson Cooper's program about the non-combatants really caused a huge storm on TikTok against me. Okay, that somebody is willing to say that the Gazan citizens are not Zionists. Well, they're not. If you look at the last polls in the Gaza Strip and also in the West Bank, you will see that even though the Gazan citizens have seen the destruction in Gaza, have seen the death toll in Gaza, 90% of the Gazans still are behind the 7th of October, and 75% are behind Hamas. Hamas is there not only because it is a forcible government, it's also there because ideologically and religiously, the people in Gaza follow the Hamas. And what I've said, and I still stand behind it, that anybody above the age of 4 in the Gaza Strip is not against the Hamas. This does not mean that we see all Gazans as enemies. We see Gazans that shoot at us as enemies. The rest of them are non-combatant, non-involved, and we try to take care of their lives. But we have to realize that we are not dealing with a friendly population that is waiting there to be released from Hamas. This is not the case. They are pro-Hamas, and they will be pro-Hamas in the future. Now, how are we going to change the situation? If you try to bring some foreign entity upon them, I would imagine it would be much more difficult than enlisting the Palestinian Authority to run the Gaza Strip. At the end of the day, these are the same Palestinians that live in the West Bank, same Palestinians that at the end of the day, I would imagine and hope want a better life, want prosperity, want somehow to have a quiet life where they can bring up their children and their families. And this is where Israel should go for. I mean, Israel should strive for a Palestinian entity that is there wishing to live in peace and not in war with Israel.
Right, and the same polls are showing, by the way, that only 10% of Palestinians believe that Hamas committed war crimes on October the 7th. I want to bring you to something a little bit earlier that was mentioned in terms of the videos themselves and how this impacts the whole issue of decision making on the one hand, and also what, in your experience, we saw that yesterday's video was actually released by the Islamic Jihad and not by Hamas. What does that mean in terms of negotiations? Israel, up until now, anyway, had to go through third parties to obviously speak to a terrorist regime. What does it mean that we know that other groups are holding the different hostages? Obviously, it impacts our ability to speak with them and move forward.
First, I want to say something about these negotiations. I really don't understand them. When the other side comes up to the negotiating table through proxies, it doesn't matter how it does that, and says, we will only negotiate if you reinstall us in power. And then we will talk about the quotas, how many prisoners, how many hostages, etc., etc. These are not really negotiations. This is an exercise in extortion. The Hamas thinks that it can extort from Israel, and it thinks so because it is looking on the Israeli society. It sees the amount of Israelis that are pro-release of the hostages right now at any price, and is rejuvenated by these people. I mean, this is what Hamas wants to achieve. Hamas, at the end of the day, is trying to weaken Israel in any way it can. And one of the ways to weaken Israel is these videos that really separates between the two different views in Israel on the hostage problem. Should we go for a deal at any price? And a word about this, and pay an extreme price by strengthening the jihad. Einstein said once that you can't do the same thing twice and expect a different result. And we have a lot of experience with these kinds of deals. The Jibril deal in 1985 and the Shalit deal not so many years ago. Both of them created the Hamas, strengthened the Hamas, and rejuvenated the anti-Israeli spirit in the West Bank. And the payment for any one of this was hundreds and then thousands of dead Israelis. And if we go for that deal, at the end of the day, we are looking at an attrition war on the Kfar Saba front, not on the Gaza front. We are looking at an attrition war at Bat Hefer. We are looking at the same things happening on the border of the West Bank, not of Gaza. And because of that, many people are against this deal. So am I. I think it would be terrible if Israel would go for that deal. And the Hamas wants to strengthen the forces that are for a deal now at any price. And these forces, in many ways, are also against this government. A word about this government. This government is really being protested against for not taking bold steps. And I want to say, even though I'm against this government, and I've never been a Bibist, I'm an anti-Bibist, if you ask me. At the end of the day, Bibi couldn't do a thing. He can change all the things that the negotiation team asks for, but the negotiation team cannot round the square here. Where at the end of the day, they come at the same impasse, and the impasse is reinstate us in Gaza. And as long as you can't do this, there is nothing that we can negotiate. So the Americans can do whatever they want. They can send Barnes here 150 times. I don't know, he must have another job running the CIA, but he's coming back and forth to Israel. The Israelis will send all the heads of the intelligence community. All of them will sit in Paris, Doha, wherever you want. And at the end of the day, they're negotiating things that the Hamas is not interested in. The Hamas is interested in its prisoners, but they're the secondary object of this negotiation. The real object of the hostages is reinstating us in Gaza and really surrendering to Hamas and letting the Hamas regroup, rebuild itself so it can do the same thing it did on the 7th of October.
So does that ultimately mean that Israel will have to sit down with all the hostage families and tell them you're never going to see your loved ones again? Is that what it's going to come to?
Well, I'll tell you something about what happened in 1985. 1985, the government was a unity government headed by Peres. And all of the government, everyone, agreed to the Jibril deal, where 3 Israeli soldiers were released for 1,151 Palestinians, including Kozo Komoto, including Ahmed Yassin. And there was one member of government who was against this deal. This member was Yitzhak Navon. Yitzhak Navon was a peacenik. He wasn't a right-wing member. Later on, he became the president of Israel. He was a left-wing member. And Yitzhak Navon said to the government, I'm against this deal for the following reasons. One thing, we are teaching the rest of the world to give up to hostages, and we are encouraging hostage making. On the other hand, we will pay fiercely by strengthening the jihad. And lastly, he said a government should be bold enough, straight enough, and truthful enough to come to the hostage families and say there is a red line. At the end of the day, we are in charge of taking care of 9 million citizens in Israel. And our heart aches. We are completely with you. We cry with the tragedy. But at the end of the day, we have to look at the 9 million other citizens that live here. And not only that, I can tell you, in this case, it's not only the 9 million citizens that live here, it's also Western civilization. Because by giving up to Hamas, we are strengthening the jihad across the world. These Islamic extremists are going to learn that the only way to deal with Western civilization that cares about its hostages is to take more hostages. When you, Talia, go next to Europe, you're a target. Why not? So am I. Everybody is a target, and everybody has a price, and the price is strategic. Here, the F-15 is giving up to the Kalashnikov in a tunnel that has taken a hostage.
So very, your position is very clear. I do want, though, to move on to another front because I think it is connected. You talked about the Jabril deal. You talked about Shalit. Of course, in between, we have the release of the bodies of Ehud Goldwasser and Eldad Regev from the Second Lebanon War. Similar mindset in terms of releasing hostages, even though we didn't know what their state was. Israel's in a full-on war in our north. The Galilee is completely empty of civilians right now. What do you think that the current strategy that our government is leading, especially when it comes to taking decisions regarding hostages, where does this leave our enemies in the north? Where does it leave Hezbollah in terms of devising strategy in this war of attrition that continues, or Iran that's really, directing and navigating the situation from there?
I have to tell you that there is a huge difference in negotiating a hostage deal between the Hezbollah and the Palestinians. I have personally negotiated with the Hezbollah the release of two bodies, Pink and El-Sheikh, at the end of the 90s. Hezbollah is a different entity than the Palestinians, and the negotiations with the Hezbollah at the end of the day did not change in any way the strengthening, the strength of the jihad, and because it's also a different religion. We're talking about Shia, and here we're talking about Muslim Brotherhood. Another world. Nonetheless, I want to say a word about the North. Israel cannot live with this situation. Situation right now is that Israel is back to the partition deal of 1948 in the United Nations. We have given up some of our North because there is a war with Hezbollah. This government is, let me say it differently. Netanyahu has never been a very big hero, even though he's tried to portray himself. He's always has been the, how do you say, he's been the one that didn't want to take any risks, that tried to run away from trouble, that was more or less, they said the brave soldier Schweik. You ever heard about the brave soldier Schweik? It's a story about the Second World War where there's a German soldier called Schweik, and he was very brave. He never got to war. Same Netanyahu. Netanyahu is not very brave. He has never taken risks. He is a non-decision maker, does not make decisions. And this is true about many things, not true about one thing. He lives according to what is possible right now for his achievements. At the end of the day, Israel has no option. It has to take Hezbollah on. There is no way that we can stop this. And the only way to do this is to have a war, some kind of war with Hezbollah. We wish it would be a small war, but there's no guarantee for that. And even if there is no guarantee for that, Israel has to make this stand. Now, I say this because I look at my parents, and my parents that built this country came to this country from the Holocaust, and they would have taken on any possibility because they knew it's either they die here or they die there, and they have no option to decide. If they want to live here, they have to commit. There's a big problem. This commit is a big problem in Israel, to commit to the future of Israel. And in order to commit to the future of Israel and the future of the North, Israel would either start a war, some kind of war with Hezbollah, or make the Hezbollah leave the northern border. And I'm not talking about 1701. I'm talking about much further north in the Litani, because from the Litani, you can still shoot anti-tank missiles at Metula. It's only 4.7 kilometers from the border. You need a much bigger non-demilitarized zone, and in Lebanon, Lebanese will have to decide Either they commit to a war with Israel, and I think that Israel can take on Hezbollah. Okay, it's not going to be simple, but at the end of the day, we've had much bigger wars with the Syrians and the Egyptians together. We understand how to do this. And if I was Nasrallah, I would go back to my cave and decide to retreat, because if he does not retreat, he will not exist for a very long time.
But is this something that one more follow-up question, because we are out of time. Is Israel capable of fighting these two separate wars on two different fronts simultaneously?
Yes. Israel is capable easily of doing this. Really, in the Gaza Strip, there's no war right now. In the Gaza Strip, there's war of attrition, where we fight against guerrilla groups. In one place, it's a little bigger.
Right,
but the real war.
We continue to lose soldiers every day, as we've seen.
Yeah, but listen, in 1973, when I was in the Yom Kippur War, Israel lost in days 3,000 soldiers. Okay, I've just said this today. Some other people, my parents, there was no cell phone, so my parents would get a postcard from me every 2 weeks saying, "Mom and Dad, I'm in the Northern Heights. The war is fun. See you later." Okay. This is what they would. I still have the notes, the card. So, and my parents were committed. They didn't know what's happening with their son. I was in the battlefront, and they didn't know what was going on, but they were committed to this state. They knew that there's something that this is not for free. Okay, and it was difficult, I'm sure, but they lived on. Israeli parents today are completely different, as you yourself know. If you have a child and he hasn't phoned in 2 minutes, we're all worried. So we have to understand that we can fight this war. We will have to fight this war if we want to continue living on this piece of land. And even though it is not going to be simple, this is what we're deemed to do. It's not up to us to decide. We can become a Netanyahu and give up and fold our flag and come and decide that the border of Israel is on the Tiberias front. This is where it is. We can decide that. But if we decide that, this is the end of our existence in this land.
Okay, Rami Igra, unfortunately we're out of time, but I think we've all learned from your insights, and we very much appreciate your being with us today. Thank you.
Thank you, and have a good day.
Have a good day, everybody.